Welcome to the Hey Chaplain podcast. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. As a patrol chaplain, my goal is to help police officers make it to retirement and beyond as emotionally healthy as they possibly can be. This podcast has the same goal. So on Hey Chaplain, you'll hear from dispatchers and federal agents, sheriffs and U.S. Marshals, as well as the occasional Border Patrol agent. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain share their own wisdom so that police officers everywhere can survive and thrive. You would think that the year that you become police chief would not only be the apex of your career, but also probably one of the best years overall of your entire life. But unforeseen difficulties and tragedies can make it one of the hardest years, and this is exactly what happened to my guest today, Tim Eggebraaten. Tim was a small-town police officer nestled among the countless beautiful lakes of Minnesota. He talks about all the great law enforcement experiences that kept him in that small town, but he also reveals the struggles he had and the difficulties he faced maintaining his peace of mind as he ascended to the role of police chief. Then, unexpectedly, that first year as chief became his hardest year yet. Listen to how Tim managed to get through this dark time and come out the other side, still able to see the beauty that life holds. Here's Tim Eggebraaten. Hello, Tim. How are you today?
Jared, I am awesome. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm really glad to get to talk to you. I'm incredibly thankful that you reached out to me. Let me, learn about your story and what you've been through. How did your law enforcement career get started? Did you always want to be a cop?
Always. I remember vividly in kindergarten even, just wanting to be a police officer. And I think it started on a trip out to Seattle, and one of my mom's relatives or something, I think her son was a state trooper. And I saw a picture of him in uniform, and I have no clue who he was even, but I just saw that picture and I thought, wow, that's really cool. What's that all about? And I was just always interested in it. And, there was a time, probably like 6th or 7th grade, that I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And, thank the Lord Almighty, that lasted about 3 months. And then it was back to wanting to be a cop again. And,
yeah. Was your family supportive of that?
Yeah, they were very supportive. Mom was nervous, of course. And, I was the only son and the youngest. I had 3 older sisters. And, and they were supportive, nervous, didn't like to hear the stories or, they wanted to know how things were going, but didn't really want to get into the weeds with the details at all.
How did you first dip your toe into the law enforcement world?
Well, I went to college for it. I took the 4-year route, and it wasn't until my junior year, I'd taken sociology and all these book things. And honestly, a lot of my classes were taught by kind of cop hating people.
Yeah.
And I thought, what the heck? And I said my junior year that I interned with the Fargo Police Department. And so that was my first real exposure to what the day-to-day. It was a 10-week, 40-hour-a-week internship. And I was hooked. I mean, it was a great department. They still are a great department. When I graduated from college, went to work in a jail in Moorhead, Minnesota at the Clay County Jail, and did that for 3 years. And the whole time, I was wanting to get out onto the street. So I got a lot of friends that were cops, and loved the corrections piece of it. And I always thought, well, if the cop thing doesn't work out, I'd gladly stay in corrections for my career. And yeah, I loved it. It was fascinating, and it was great. I think every police officer should start either in dispatch or in corrections. Look at things from their perspective.
Yeah.
And because it was a totally different mindset of living with these people basically, and getting to know them as people. And instead of the piece of crap that just got arrested, look at them that way.
Yeah.
But that was good.
Yeah. So after doing a little bit of time in detention, where'd you go next?
Then I started applying everywhere, and my dream gig was like a town of 30, 40,000 people or bigger. I didn't want like Minneapolis or LAPD or anything like huge, but so I just started doing the shotgun approach and just applying everywhere. And those were the days that, you know, if an agency had one opening, there'd be, you know, 300-400 people applying for it. It was crazy. So I was applying everywhere, and Detroit Lakes, Minnesota is about 50 miles east of Fargo, North Dakota. And I had heard about Detroit Lakes. It's a small community, about 8,500 people, about 9,000 now. And the chief interviewed me a couple times, and he offered me the position. He said, you know, there's a good chance you're going to retire at this job. And I thought, you bet. Yep. You know, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And I thought, oh, hell no, I'm going to get 1 year experience. And then I was going to go with my experience, and I was going to go to a bigger department. And we had our first son. We have 3 sons, and our first son was born a month after I started working here. And I was hooked from day one. We didn't really have a field training program. I rode around with my sergeant for a couple hours, and he said, well, just go explore. And I got in a foot chase right away. And I thought, well, this is fun, but it's stupid because I have no clue where I'm at, you know. And and somebody flagged me down, and this guy had just been beaten up, and his eyeball was like all mashed, and they were asking for where the hospital was, and I had no clue. And I was like, yeah, you know, I just moved here. And
now, in the early 90s, about how many sworn would have been there at that department?
I think we had 12 sworn. Okay. But then, like, for the 4th of July, we brought in, we doubled that, you know, for the 4th of July. So we had cadets from the local schools, or, you know, the colleges, tech colleges, and then other sworn officers. But I think we had 12 sworn at that time. And high speed pursuit, like my 4th day. And so I was hooked. I mean, the adrenaline, the whole thing. And just, it was everything I thought being a cop was going to be and more. I mean, it just, I loved it. And so I had a wonderful career there. Did the, patrol forever. I was a canine handler for 6 years or 7 years, and hands down the best 7 years of the whole career. The best gig was night patrol sergeant with a dog. And we were the only dog around, and like in the Tri-County area. So we'd go all over the place, and had the world by the tail. It was amazing. Great partner, 92-pound purebred German Shepherd, and loyal and strong and courageous, and the whole 9 yards. And so that was awesome. And then I did investigations for a few years, and that was exciting. I looked at everything as a new challenge, and you know, Detroit Lakes is, you know, we're a smaller community, and pretty early on in my career, I started to get that us versus them mentality. You know, it seemed like everybody on the night shift that I was, you know, like we were dealing with, they were either going to run away from me, lie to my face, or square up and try to fight me. And so my world started to divide up into that us versus them. It was the cops I worked with that night versus pretty much everybody. You know, my chief was clueless. He had no clue what we were going through. And the sergeant had forgotten what it was like to be a real cop. And the investigators were a bunch of loads that just sat around doing nothing. And, you know, so that was, and I know that's not just a cop thing, because we all have fallen into that us versus them, but I was really getting into that us versus them, and met a older guy on one of my calls that his name was Norman, and he didn't even say anything. He was just being his kind, gentle self. And he just a simple, kind of confused guy. He rocked my world. Just by being himself, he kind of brought me back to, holy crap, what are you doing? I mean, this isn't what I signed on for. It kind of woke you up? It woke me up big time, like thinking, who have I become? You know, that this us versus them, and what a jackass I was becoming. And, you know, and I wasn't raised to be a knuckle dragging thug. I mean, I was raised to be conscientious and thoughtful and caring and help people. And that's what I got into the business for. And I found myself starting to like get caught up in the culture of that us versus them, like just that mindset of, man, there's a lot of power here. And I never like would beat people up or anything like that. But it was very clear in my mind that you were either a cop or you weren't. And those that weren't, I'm not sure I can trust you.
It's easy to have a lot of disdain for people. Yeah. Yeah. What do you think kept you? I mean, even during some of those days where maybe you didn't have the best attitude, what kept you at a small department?
The lakes. I mean, just the area we live in. We have 412 lakes within 25 miles of my house, and it's gorgeous. And the work we were doing, we were handling everything that the big city men and women were doing. We had homicides, not a lot, of course, but I mean, proportionately, pound for pound, we were doing everything everybody else was doing. And then I got to get my fingers in on everything. So if we had a homicide, I'd respond to the call. I would, help the ambulance people with the victims, and then we would secure the crime scene, and we'd do everything. And so I think that part of it was what really kept me in, was that I got to do like literally every aspect, whether it was fingerprinting or, crime scene investigation. And if we had a major crime scene like a homicide, like the BCA, Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, would come and assist, but we would assist them. And
it's a truth of small departments that I think a lot of times cops imagine, well, if I go to a small department, I'm going to miss out. But that's not really always the case. In fact, sometimes it's when you're at a really big department and everybody is specialized. It's usually in those big departments where you feel like you're missing out, because you're siloed into a very specific career track, or at least a job at the time, and you're not allowed to step over into those other lanes because there's a whole nother unit working that.
Exactly. And it was all of that, and I think that's what really got me. And then, being embedded in the community, it was really easy when I started here because I wasn't little Timmy Eggebraaten that grew up down the street. I'm not from here.
Right.
And so when I started here, I was Officer Eggebraaten. So that added to that persona. I think if I had been from here, it would have been a whole nother set of challenges to try to police where you're from.
Yeah.
There's good and bad with it, I'm sure. But
how did your career advance? Now, that's another fear of a small department. It's like, well, I'll have a job, then I'll just die in that one position. I'll never get to advance. So how did your career advance?
I was aggressive. I mean, I liked what I was doing, like working the night shift. That was the best thing I would ever work days. And so I'd really get into what I was doing. And then when the sergeant position opened up, I interviewed for it, and I had just gotten the K-9 unit started. And that was another thing. Like, we were such a small department that I would always believe that if there's not a hat to wear, well, make a hat, or suggest a hat. And so we never had a dog. And so I approached the chief at the time and the city council, and we got this idea for the dog. I raised money like within 2 weeks. The community was all over it, and went to school. And, so it was that kind of stuff. Like, okay, we don't have it, but, is it something that would be useful? Well, let's go get it then. And I just had that mindset. So then I got promoted to sergeant, and I was sergeant for, I don't remember how many years, 13 years or 14 years. And so that was the dream job, night shift, sergeant with a dog. Oh, good Lord. It doesn't get any better than that.
The good old days right there. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So then I went into investigations, and I did that, loved it. And that was my first real steady diet of normal life, like Monday through Friday, get called out once in a while, but, and that was awesome. I loved it. And I was like, okay. And my friends were giving me crap because, oh yeah, Mr. I'm never going to leave nights. I love nights. Why would anybody work days? And, and with 3 boys that were active in school stuff, it was awesome. And my oldest son, I missed one of his football games his senior year because we had a standoff, and I was like the negotiator, and I was like, oh man, seriously, and missing my kid's game. But so then when the Chiefs job opened up, Actually, it was a chief of police from another department or another agency that was not too far from here. They had posted their chief of police job, and I was looking at the requirements. And up until that point, I never, ever even, it wasn't even a flicker that I would even apply to be chief of police. But I was looking at the requirements for this chief of police job, and I thought, well, wait a minute. I got all the boxes checked.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I? And so I started really analyzing it, talking with my wife, and went after it. When the Detroit Lakes job opened up, and got the job. And in July of 2011, I was sworn in as the chief of police. And I thought, wow, okay, here we go. This is the logical progression of things. And it was what we needed to do.
And for a lot of cops, that might be an ambition that's just like, man, someday maybe I could reach that level, and they really aspire to that. And now you've achieved it, and you would think this would be about the best year of your life, being a chief for the first year. But you approached me and said, I've got a slightly different story. Tell me how that went once you became chief.
So I was sworn in July of 2011. And in May of 2011, my wife had recently been diagnosed with breast cancer, and our oldest son was getting ready to graduate from high school. So each one of those life events, me getting the chief job and our son graduating and my wife handling breast cancer, each one by themselves was significant.
Yeah.
But all three of them simultaneously had a potential to derail our rhythm, and I always refer to like rhythm of life. I love music, and I love how music, plays out with our rhythm of life. And so it was challenging right away. And my wife is like 11 years cancer free right now. So on that one. And but it was a challenging time, but I was like all in, and let's do this, and I'm gonna give it my all. And so I started being the boss. And how every situation we're in life, we can easily sit back and say, oh yeah, but that guy's got it easy. It would be easy to be a podcast host. Anybody could do it. Or it'd be easy to be a chaplain. How hard could that be? But until you're in that position, and I sat back through all the stages of my career. Like when I was a patrolman, my sergeant was an idiot, my captain was an idiot, the chief is an idiot, and then I was a sergeant. It was like, okay, well, maybe the sergeant wasn't an idiot, maybe he did know, but the chief is still an idiot, and then when I got to be chief, it was like, holy crap, now I'm
now you're the idiot, right?
I'm the idiot, exactly. And I owned it, by golly. And so I was that buffer between the city council and my boss, the citizens. I mean, they're our bosses. And so I was the buffer between them and the police officers. And I grew up in that department. I knew those people. I would literally die for those people, those men and women in my department. And so the first time one of our union representatives came into my office when I was going through and updating the policy manual, and he came in and was barking at me about something in the policy manual, like I could maybe try to trip them up and catch them with this new policy. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? It's me, look at me.
Yeah,
and that just, it floored me that I would get challenged on something like that. Like, oh, now you're the chief, now you're going to screw us. And so that, that was an interesting dynamic that I wasn't expecting. I couldn't have expected it. And so it was challenging all the way around. And then it was Mother's Day, May 13th. Sunday, beautiful day to celebrate all the moms and my wife and my mom and her mom. And at the end of that day, I was playing music, my favorite thing to do, to a bunch of senior citizens at a nursing home, and had a big band behind me, like trumpets and trombones and saxophones. And this band was looking for a vocalist for some gigs they had coming up, and they asked me. And I said, heck yeah. And so while I'm up there singing, we're doing Mac the Knife. And oh, the shark bait, and whoop, whoop, it was just like awesome. And my phone was in my pocket blowing up. And I got home and started checking my messages. And one of the messages was from the wife of one of my best friends and partners. We'd been partners for 19 years. His name is Chad, and his wife is Chantel. And Chad and Chantel were one of the first couples my wife and I met when we moved to Detroit Lakes. And they got married shortly after we moved here. And he got hired on the department shortly after I did. And their first child, their only daughter, they asked my wife and I to be godparents for Haley. And so we were close. We were tight with that family. And, and as our careers changed and everything, or as our roles in the department changed, we hadn't done as much socially together in the past few years, but we were still very much brothers. He was at my swearing-in ceremony and very much brothers. And so that Mother's Day, Chantel had texted me, "Do you know where Chad is? We have to find Chad. Something's wrong." And as I was going through the messages, I got a call from Chad's father, and he said, "Do you know where Chad is? We have to find Chad. Something's wrong." And I think we had 14 cops maybe at that time, and I had a pretty good handle on what the schedule was. And I said, I think he's working today. Let me give him a call. I'll call you right back. So then when I hung up the phone, and my phone rang again, and it was one of my young police officers, and he said, "Chief, Chad's dead."
Oh, wow.
And so all I knew was that Chad had died, and they were just outside of the city limits of DL. And my mind kicked into chief of police mode. And, my wife met me at the door when I was walking to my car, and she could see something was wrong. And I dropped that bombshell on her that Chad had died. And I would have loved to have been able to console her, but I had to go to work. And so I hopped in my squad car and I started heading toward the scene. And the whole time on the way there, I was thinking, okay, boss, how you gonna be there for this family of his? Hey, boss, how you gonna be there for your family?
Yeah.
Hey, chief, how you gonna lead your team now in these next hours and days, minutes, and the whole shooting match? And I got to the scene and I could see an ambulance, and there were Becker County Sheriff's deputies, and some of my guys were there, and there were family members hugging and crying, and I could see Chad's pickup parked off the road in a clearing of trees. And as I walked up, I could see a note taped to the driver's side window of Chad's pickup. And, and I'd been around long enough, I kind of started to figure out what was going on. And I got to that front of that pickup, and on the ground there was the boy. And Chad had worked that Mother's Day, worked a day shift, got off duty, and while still in uniform, he died by suicide. And that whole rhythm of life thing at that point was a complete blur. I thought, okay, well, now what? I mean, I was numb. I was numb for that day. And that next day we had shut the office down. Nobody came in. I was by myself, and I was cleaning up some of Chad's stuff so I could give it to his family. And I thought, okay, now, big boy, this is a good time to cry. If you're going to cry, let's do this. And because I wasn't a crier. Now, good Lord, I cry at Disney movies. And my second grandson was just born, and I'm like a blubbering idiot. But at that stage of life, I didn't cry, and there was nothing. I was like, okay, this would be a good time to let her out. And there was nothing there. And so we got help from other agencies, and I'd reached out to other chiefs and command staff from other departments. One of the things that I did really well at every level of my career that I was really good at, I was good at networking, and I would get to know other people at my level, wherever I was at, and from other departments, to call and honestly say, hey, what do you guys do when this happens? Or what's going on in your agency? And so I got help from other chiefs and command staff that night, and then the next day and that week. and just leaned heavily on these people. And for that summer, it was a complete blur. And we had another officer that was under a lot of pressure, and he was experiencing some issues. And I was on the phone with him heading to his house, and we got to his house and we were looking in the woods for him. We heard a scream and a gunshot. And I thought, what the hell? I'm going to go get another brother.
Yeah.
And luckily he didn't hurt himself. We got to him. We got him the help he needed. Still a good friend of mine today. But this was all within my first year of being chief of police. And
yeah.
And
can I ask a question about that?
Of course.
You have you're the chief. And
yeah.
So when an officer dies, there's a large amount of administrative logistics that you need to be coordinating. You need to talk to other agencies. You need to deal with family benefits and his gear and schedules and hiring. And there's all kinds of things that start in motion when an officer dies. And that's a lot to deal with. Do you think you got overly fixated on those things? Do you think that you were attentive enough to them? Do you feel like you had a good relationship to all those responsibilities?
I do for most of them, because I felt at that time I was an autopilot, and I welcomed the autopilot because I didn't have to think about Tim Eggebraaten.
Yeah,
I could focus on the gear. I could focus on the hiring process. I could focus on
you keep busy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it was all of that. And then plus my life, my three sons and my wife and
your music and that kind of stuff.
The whole thing, and it was just, and I still was, 110 miles an hour, and I was just like, let's go. And so I feel like, from my perspective, I feel like I handled everything well and had a lot of support, a lot of, like for Chad's funeral, we had neighboring departments that covered our town for calls, and they coordinated. It was just outside of Detroit Lakes in a town called Frazee. And that's where the funeral was. And so the Frazee police chief and our sheriff, they took it on them to coordinate all that. And so, yeah, it was a lot going on. And it was that balance of keep on keeping on. But it was too much there because the dam was starting to break and it was starting to get cracks in it. And that summer, I thought I was going nuts. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't sleep well. My wife knew nothing about anything that I did in my career. I just didn't share that with anybody. And so I was starting to have like trouble sleeping and having nightmares, and I'd go to the tub to relax, and I'd get in the tub, and in my mind, the tub would be full of blood, from suicides that I'd handled. And all of these things. And I thought, holy crap, I am freaking losing it here.
and you're not communicating this to anybody yet, right?
Nothing, zero.
Okay.
And drinking a lot, and it was party on Eggebraaten, and it was just, it was I don't know if it was, psychologically, if it's a mechanism or whatever, but I was not processing it, and things were starting to ooze out into my mind, and I thought, man, I am losing it. And so that fall of 2012, we hosted a regional chief of police association meeting in Detroit Lakes, and so I had all these chief friends. We were hanging around and having some cocktails on Thursday night before our meeting on Friday, and I think we even had musical entertainment, and we're yucking it up, and I love these guys and gals, and we were just like, I was just living it, and our chaplain, who was a retired police chief, he came up to me during this Thursday night event and said, "How you doing, Tim?" I'm like, "Dan, I am great, brother. How are you?" And he just said, "How you doing, Tim?" I said, "Dan, I am out freaking standing. How are you?" "How you doing, Tim?" And I was like, "Dan, where are we going with this? mean, what's up? And he said, Tim, this first year of you being chief of police, you got hit by a couple of trucks. And right now you're hanging out with these chiefs, and it's kind of like getting hit by the trucks and getting checked out by the paramedics. And that's fine. But he said, have you ever thought about getting your head checked out? And I looked at him and I thought, how is he in my head? How does he know what I've been going through? So Pastor Dan gave me this phone number of a guy who was a Minneapolis police sergeant, and said, he's a Minneapolis PD sergeant. He's also a psychologist and therapist, and you can go talk to him, and it'd be money under the table. Nobody will know. And I was like, huh. And so I took the name and number, and I just sat on it for a few weeks, and my symptoms were still persisting, and I still thought I was going crazy. So I sat in my office, I shut the door, and I called our local psychologist at Sanford Health in Detroit Lakes. And it was just like the sixth grader calling the cute girl from school. I was trying to dial the numbers, and I'd hang up. And
right.
And I finally got through and made an appointment, and, walked in, and I thought, man, people are going to know that I'm nuts, because it's got to be written all over me. And here I'm walking in uniform into Sanford Clinic, and I'm sitting with all the other crazy people. And of course, none of this was reality, but that's how it was in my mind.
Top belt. Yeah.
And I thought, man, someone's going to call 911 and say that the crazy singing police chief has got a gun. And but I had my appointment with my friend, the psychologist. I said, Doc, do I have PTSD? And he said, I don't think so. And he talked about how our brain acts like a funnel, where we're putting trauma in there, and in a normal, healthy situation, that trauma gets dealt with, and it kind of comes out the bottom of that funnel and in proper, healthy thought. And my funnel was so backed up from 20 plus years of junk getting stuffed in there. And Chad's death was the last bit to try to get stuffed in there.
Yeah.
And he said, one thing people do instead of trying to repress it and shut these videos off as they're playing in your head, maybe start talking about it.
Yeah.
And I did. And it turned into a stinking career now. And it's, talking about mental health and taking care of ourselves. And
it's so important that we storytell our trauma, but you do more than just talk about it. Can you kind of describe what life is like for you right now?
Yeah, I consider it my senior year of policing. My last year in Minnesota, we can retire at age 50 and start drawing our pension. We take a penalty. 55 is kind of the optimum age. But I knew at age 48, Chad's death took a lot of the wind out of my sail and made me really reevaluate life and purpose. And so by the time I got to be 48 years old, I kind of knew I was going to retire at 50, but I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to be doing. I knew entertainment would be part of it. I've been entertaining for, I don't know, probably close to 30 years, 25 years. And I was a one-man band, and I knew that was going to be a part of it. But the chief of police from Burnsville, Minnesota, down by the Twin Cities, he called me up, asked me, it was just a few months before I retired, and he said, brother, would you come and share your leadership journey with my leadership team? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I don't know why not. And so I went down there with my guitar, and so it was probably 15 command staff from this police department that were in the room. And, I sang a couple songs, and we rode a roller coaster. We were laughing and crying. And I found out later that they had just been involved in an officer-involved shooting, and I didn't know that. So there was a lot of tension in the room. And I got done, and I went to the parking lot, and I was shaking, and I called my wife. I said, honey, I found my next thing. I mean,
oh, wow.
When I leave law enforcement, it found me. I don't know which one. So I started talking with law enforcement organizations and dispatchers, and then EMS, and I just, honed my message, and we rode this roller coaster. We ride it every single time. And then it branched out to farmers and teachers and windmill farm managers and nursing, that these people are frustrated and they're burnt and they're thinking, what the hell did I get into this for?
Yeah.
Why did I start doing this? And they lost their sense of purpose or their sense of focus. And so we do that, through storytelling and some music and these tactics that I've applied to my life, because they were modeled for me, certain things that I'm doing pretty much daily to keep myself in check. So I started doing that, go around talking to organizations and just share that message of finding our own beat and that rhythm of life. And I get way more out of it than I'm sure the listeners do, because I'm always learning, and there's always people that will come up afterwards and they want to share their experiences. And
well, that's just it. It may be very therapeutic for you to do this, but it's also incredibly important. It's a milestone for people to hear someone else articulate what they feel. Mm-hmm. And they are frustrated and worn down and demoralized and just sapped of energy. And you say, well, you know what? I went through kind of the same thing. And they're like, oh, wow, I thought I was the only one.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're the helpers, and you're the helper. The chaplains are the helpers. And so many of us are in helping fields like nursing or teaching, and we're the last ones. We suck at helping ourselves. We're horrible at it.
Yeah, that's what chaplains say, that we're the trash can that the other trash cans dump into. Yep. And so if you have a job like that, sometimes the chaplain then goes and absorbs all the stuff, whether it's at a hospital or police station or whatever it is. They absorb all the stuff that all the other trash cans have been absorbing, all the horrible things. And so chaplains have to go find a place to talk about it too. They need to, or they'll end up in the same boat. We'll start finding all these little self-destructive things that begin emerging in our lives, and it will take us down just as easily as anybody else. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that us versus them, it goes to, it's everybody experiences it. And even like within cops, it's like, well, yeah, but you work in a small town. You don't know what it's like to work in the big city. Bull crap. I may not know what it's like to work in your city.
Yeah.
But, we share similar experiences, and that's the thing. And that's when I heard your podcast, that's what drew me to it. First of all, the Hey Chaplain, that whole chaplain piece of my life, where Pastor Dan, I just called him up last weekend, and just because I want to stay in contact with him and just remind him that he probably saved my life. And so the work that you are doing, my brother, is you're spreading this information out there, and you'll hear from just a itty bitty fraction of the people that you're touching. And so hats off to you, my friend, for taking the reins on this and bringing in these guests all over the board. I love it. I love the variety that you're bringing in, and the wholeness of ourselves. And so
thank you.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah. Well, I knew that it's difficult to talk to helpers, whether it's a chaplain or peer support or whatever it may be. It's difficult to make that happen. But I knew that at least some cops would listen to a podcast, because they could put the earbuds in and do that, and no one knows what they're listening to. And they could listen to other cops talk about their pain, talk about the trauma, talk about doing some wise things and getting healthier. And they don't have to admit that to anybody. They can just very quietly listen and absorb and be encouraged. And so I'm thankful for the opportunity, and I'm thankful for what you're doing. So tell us where can we find you? How can we get you to come talk to us on a training day or something like that? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
My website is offdutychief.com.
Okay.
And that has a contact form on there and stuff. And my phone number is listed right there. And, I used to be able to say, if you need me, call 911, but it doesn't work anymore. So don't even think about it. But
I need the singing police chief. How do I find him?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Offdutychief.com. And another part that I love doing is like this weekend, I'm doing a presentation for first responders, and I'm also including, as long as I go to these things, I'm already there. I'll do like entertainment piece too, like just a full blown, let's have some fun singing whatever we're going to sing. And so I do all that too. But so the website's the easiest way. And I literally go all across the country. I'll be in Alabama and Tennessee and Arizona,
Fantastic.
California. Yeah, it's an honor. It really is. And so for the cop wearing the earbud right now, listening to this, brother or sister, just know that it's not an easy gig. We know this, and it's okay for you to reach out to somebody for some assistance. And we do it so well. We help other people, and we need to help ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's been lip service for so many years, but I feel like agencies and organizations are finally getting off their wallet, and they're investing in these men and women.
Yeah.
And finally putting their money where their mouth is and making it more than just lip service. I love it.
Yeah.
Like to see more.
And that cop that's miserable is not alone.
No.
People have been there, they've been through it, and many of them have recovered, and they've found a joy to living again. And so don't sit there and listen to this and think you're all by yourself.
I've talked to so many cops. How you doing, brother? Oh, living the dream.
Yeah.
I've heard that like in a sarcastic way so many times. And so when people ask me, how you doing, Tim? I am living the dream. I mean, literally. And it is a beautiful world out there. And when we're called, every day to respond to somebody's emergency, and we're doing this day in and day out, and in that toxic environment, that's when we need to remember that there's a lot of beauty out there. The beauty is still there, and we just need to look for it. But I do know what it's like, and it's the beauty is there. It's a beautiful world we're living in, and we have law enforcement. It was the front row seat to the greatest show on earth. I mean, it was amazing. I loved it, and there's not much of it that I miss. But it got me to where I'm at right now, and not any regrets.
That's awesome. Thank you, Tim, for sharing, and I appreciate the work you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. I'm sure our paths will cross at some time. I'd love to meet you in person.
Absolutely.
And buy you a cup of coffee or something.
Please, if you're ever in Kansas City, I'll show you what real barbecue is supposed to taste like.
Oh, stop it. All right, I'll be there soon.
Fantastic. God bless you, brother.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
You too.
Bye-bye. So these days I get a lot of cold calls and emails from people and their agents asking to be on the show. And I ignore most of those. My list of potential show topics and interviewees is already almost too long for me to manage by myself. But somehow, when Tim reached out to me, I knew to respond and to try to work him into the schedule, and I'm so glad that I did. If you get a chance to have Tim come to your agency and talk about his story and how he is still able to find the beautiful melodies in life, I really think it'll be worth your while. And I love that his way of maintaining his own peace of mind is to help other police officers talk about their trauma for the first time. Tim's information is in the show notes. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
Some of the events that we would sort of automatically classify as a critical incident, like a line of duty death or the suicide of a colleague or
shootings,
some kind of
that kind of thing.
Officer involved shootings, significant events involving children, events that have a tremendous media interest associated with them. Those are the kind of things that we typically would classify as a critical incident, although I think it's important to keep the definition in mind that it's any incident, that for any individual, it doesn't have to be a group that's involved in something together. It can be any individual that is experiencing significant distress, and whatever they normally do to cope isn't working. For that person, that's a critical incident.
The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city.